to say that both of these groups don't have valid arguments, because they do. I believe so. I believe some of the things they say are fair, some of the things they say are not. This is true for a lot of opinions in a lot of groups, because we can't really get everything right at the same time, and we can't really get everything right all the time. So
feminism is definitely a group, and it's all about group think. And you can see that playing out today in the social media realm, where people who go against the group think are expelled from the group and cancelled by the group members. J.K. Rowling is an excellent example of that at the moment. Now, MGTOW is not a group. There isn't any groupthink. And when you're saying some views are right and some views are wrong, for a MGTOW, he's going his own way. And yes, he's going to make mistakes, which doesn't mean he's wrong. It's just an opportunity to learn. So when you're saying there's groups that are right and groups that are wrong, and some things that groups think are right and some things that groups think are wrong, you're not addressing MGTOW. You're addressing feminism. You're not addressing MGTOW, because MGTOW is about the individual. It's not about the group.
Obviously, they do have some valid arguments, but they also don't. And I think that's a more balanced view of seeing the world, is that in every belief, in every group, there's a part of it that's right. There's a part of it that's probably not that right, that could always improve. That allows for...
I think what you're doing is cherry picking what you like. I think you're cherry picking the bits that you like out of the feminism, and the bits that you don't like, you're discarding, and you're doing the same thing with MGTOW. You're just taking what you like and discarding what you don't. That would be typical of a young woman today.
For people to not become so extremist in their beliefs. Now, the biggest problem with men and women dividing and fighting against each other is that it hurts them deeply. You might...
Right. MGTOW are not fighting women. Right? A man is making a choice, and he's entitled to make that choice. This is the shaming tactic. We were saying the men are dividing and fighting. We're not dividing and fighting. Men are looking at what's happening in the world and what women have to offer him as a man, and they're saying, no, thank you. They're looking at society and what society is doing to men, and they're saying, no, thank you. We don't want that. We're going to go our own way. And it's not a subversive movement, right? This isn't about subversion. This is just men who, and they're not checking out. They're going their own way. They're finding their own goals and they're achieving them. They're doing what men do. This is male nature on display. We're not fighting. Men don't like to fight, right? There are contact sports, and men excel at contact sports, that's for sure, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about fighting. We're not fighting, okay? And you can see that in the world around you. People don't want to go to war, right? Men don't want to go to war. War is always the last resort. So we're not fighting, and we're not checking out. We're part of society. We're just not bonding or settling down, or whatever you want to call it, with women for a very good reason.
Not realize this when you're young. It's easy not to, but life does get harder as you age, and you don't want to go through life without a spouse or a family. I don't find that to be a very wise decision for your life. I know there's a lot of people who feel that way nowadays. You know, they're like, I'm better off without children, I'm better off without a spouse, I'm better off traveling on my own. But unless you have...
Yeah, life gets harder for women on their own. And as an older man, I can tell you, life gets a hell of a lot easier the older you get, especially if you're MGTOW. All right? So, yeah, you're standing there and you've just told us previously that as a young woman, you've got all these perks if you just look pretty and soft-spoken and be presentable, and all the world opens up to you. Yeah, well, you try that when you're 40, sweetheart. Okay, see how the world's opening up for you then. Yeah, you're going to have to be buying a lot of cat food. Okay, so don't sit there telling MGTOW that life gets harder and we need a spouse and babies and blah, 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 because it fucking doesn't. I'm living the best life I've ever lived. I've never been happier in my life at the moment, and I can honestly say that. Every day is like paradise to me. I wake up at dawn so that I can watch the sun come up, and I watch the sunset every night. It's fantastic. I go out, I look at the stars and the planets. It's just, life is absolutely has never been better. It's not without its problems. Don't get me wrong, there's no such thing as Shangri-La or paradise, but MGTOW definitely for a man is the way to go.
Have some occupation that you're like so extremely brilliant at that you need all your focus and all your time to be dedicated to that activity. Unless you have that special career that you're absolutely brilliant at, I don't see a reason why you would want to remain single for the rest of your life. This is just my opinion, of course, but it is also rooted by the experiences and the people that I've met around me. And a lot of the people that end up really bitter in life and really resentful against the world, even possibly dangerous and violent, are people who didn't fulfill the things that they really wanted to fulfill in life by lying to themselves, by being in denial. Some people will hold contempt for things that could possibly be good for them just because they have such a biased lens. You see, when you grow old, the only people that will hopefully still be there for you unconditionally are your children and or your spouse. If you don't have that and you're only relying on friends or other family, it could work up to a certain point, but those people will most likely have their own family that will be priority to them. We will never prioritize others as much as we prioritize our own families. And for good reason. I believe it should be like that. So if you grow old alone, I don't see how that could be a good future for you. And so I feel like what these groups are causing is a lot of that. A lot of people who grow old alone and become bitter and angry, which causes more crime, because people who are bitter and angry are most likely to engage in criminal activity, violence, rape and murder and all these.
Just listening to that, the only thing I can say is you're living in a fantasy world, woman. You've been watching too much Disney Channel. All right? Just stop talking about the violence and the anger. That's not MGTOW. Okay, that's definitely feminism. All right, as a group. I mean, they're the ones calling for the murder of all men on the planet. All right, and not being shouted down for it. All right, they're being lauded for that by the women and the media. Okay? So don't sit there telling MGTOW we're violent and we're angry and we're bitter. Alright, yes, there are some very angry young MGTOW out there and I can see why. Alright, but as it's just male nature to deal with that anger, to overcome it and to progress forward. It's just male nature. That's what we do. So don't sit there in your privileged little world telling us that we're violent and angry people, because we're not.
These types of things. Men who are extremely resentful at women and have been seeing the world through the lens that all women are bad, one day, if they indulge in their fantasies, probably kill someone or rape someone. And so that is not a good way to construct society, by lying to people like that. Children that come from broken families, from families where their parents separated, abusing each other, they're indulging in drugs and alcohol. People who grow up in broken families and they don't have such a sense of stability and strong role models in their lives. There's a lot of data on this that fatherless children, especially men, fatherless men are much more likely to commit crimes and to end up with mental illness, poverty, and all sorts of disastrous consequences to our society. The reason I'm talking about feminism and men going their own way is it's not because I care about, the drama and, oh my gosh, she did what and he did what. It's more about how this is really collapsing our society little by little. And I am worried about that. I don't like where things are heading right now. Some people would argue that what these groups are doing isn't such a big deal. You know, they're just doing their own thing. But I would argue with that because I used to consider myself a feminist, and I had been hurt by some men, which caused me to start resenting those men and starting to resent men in general, which caused me to seek revenge by wanting to become a feminist. And then that led me to become a little bit of an outraged feminist. I wouldn't say that I was the most outraged. I was like mild. I believed I was outraged, but then when I went to feminist pages and saw their posts, I was like, whoa, this is really extreme. And it put me off, to be honest with you. A lot of the things that feminists say and a lot of the things that they believe are too much and too extreme, and they're more about dominating men than equality. Feminists in general have a really hard time admitting this, but if they really dig into it, they can come to the same conclusion as well. Now I want to...
All right, thank you for that. It's pretty obvious to everyone now that you're just projecting your own life experience onto the MGTOW. I think that's absolutely clear that you got hurt, which you're claiming MGTOW get hurt, and you became bitter and resentful and wanted revenge, which is where the violence comes into it. And so you became a feminist for whatever reason. You became a feminist, and you projecting all of that onto MGTOW. And of course, coming from feminism, you can see it as a group, and so you're now projecting that group think onto MGTOW, which is completely wrong. And then you're now accusing MGTOW of everything that you feel guilty about. So really, this is blame the nearest man. Put that yoke back on, young man, get back onto the plantation because I've got needs. That's where you're coming from. So it's pretty selfish, it's pretty self-centered, egotistical, narcissistic. Honestly, you want me to listen to the end of this video so that you can give me some life advice. Go back to school, sweetheart. Get yourself into that library and start reading some fucking books, because you've really got nothing to say.
Touch on another subject that I find important is that women will regard men as privileged, or at least more privileged than they are. And